Events, we are focusing now on Chinese President Xi Jinping, who's met with his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin, amid the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. The Chinese president claimed that he is in Russia on a state visit at President Putin's request and expressed his confidence that his trip will be successful. This timing is, of course, coinciding with him being sworn in as the president in China for a third time. After playing peacemaker between Iran and Saudi Arabia, China is now trying to play peacemaker in the Ukraine war with its 12-point proposal to end the ongoing conflict. Russia has chosen China as its powerful friend against the hostile West. The two have called each other dear friends. But can Putin's dear friend really convince him to end the war? Amidst all of this, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who was in India, also has dropped in Ukraine to meet President Zelensky. Amidst the raging war, why has the Chinese president decided to visit Russia, and that too at a time when half of the world has imposed sanctions on Moscow? This is Xi Jinping's first international visit after securing a third term as president of China. It has been a difficult diplomatic spot for China since the war between Russia and Ukraine began as friends and allies of Russia. Beijing wants to cement its position as a peace broker after the Saudi-Iran deal. Successful mediation can actually help China with the West and avoid the kind of hostility that is growing towards it. Conversely, and at the same time, together, China and Russia want to challenge the US-based world order, and a deal here could help the two in doing so. Beijing has offered a 12-point peace proposal to end this war. This is part of China's push to try and act as a mediator. So, as part of this proposal, what is China saying? It is saying that conflict and war benefit no one, pitches a dialogue and negotiation as the way forward, wants sovereignty of all countries upheld but hasn't really named Russia or Ukraine, urges West to end sanctions on its friend Russia, calls for ending Cold War mentality, again a jibe at the West, opposes use of nuclear weapons in war, though this could be more directed to Russia, says will play a constructive role but hasn't really given any details. And will the West really look at China playing a constructive role, or is the West going to be firmly wary? Along with that, we'll look at other questions. But the biggest question on everybody's mind is, as Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin meet, can it really end the war? First up, I want to go across to my colleague Sanjay Suri, who's joining us. He's been keeping a close watch on everything that's been transpiring in Ukraine, Russia's actions, and of course now a big visit, a big state visit with Xi Jinping arriving in Russia and meeting Putin. Sanjay, how are both the West and Moscow really looking at this visit?
You know, the way Moscow is looking at it has been indicated quite firmly well before this summit began. Two visits from Putin, the first to Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014. It has been Ukraine's demand that the war will only end when Ukraine takes Crimea back. Second, the following day, Putin then went to Mariupol in the Donbas region, and that is a city that the Russians conquered after very, very fierce, bloody fighting that led to thousands and thousands of casualties. Both those visits marked an affirmation of Putin's intent that he intends at the least to hold on to areas that Russia has occupied. Once Putin has declared he will do that, and that declaration came very firmly before this summit, the fact is that Ukrainians are not about to let go of either. Ukraine is never going to come to a settlement that says it will abandon a substantial portion of its territory that Russia took by force and that it annexed. This clearly is pointing to an impasse. Another indication, again before the summit, that tells us everything about the summit, which is that President Joe Biden said that China cannot be an effective interlocutor. It is not a neutral party in this dispute. And so we have lines very firmly drawn before the summit, and nothing through this summit has suggested any reason to revise or review those positions that have been indicated earlier. This is clearly now an alliance building up between Russia and China. The only question is how far China goes, whether China will go, as the US says it intends to, by arming Russia with lethal weapons. If China stops short of that, that will be for the West limited achievement enough. But that is really the question hovering over the summit now.
Yeah, because, this brings me to my second question, Sanjay, because everybody's pitching this as some sort of peacemaking exercise. But I've been wondering, there doesn't seem to be any end to this impasse, right? So it's great branding for this visit as some sort of a peace brokering visit, but there is no end in sight. There is really no formula that is acceptable. So why is she really in Moscow?
Well, this is clearly to firm up ties with the Russians, and there has been a good deal of rhetoric against the US coming from China that has become increasingly shrill of late. And of course, Putin has been at this game for a while. They have a common cause, so to speak, and that common cause is not just by way of rhetoric. There is a trade, and there is a good deal of bilateral trade between the two countries that is beating the sanctions. The imports and the exports from Russia are now heavily with China, and that is in the currency that both countries can live with. Again, beating sanctions. So there is an economic imperative for the Chinese, certainly to a limited extent.
Okay.
For Russians, far more. For China, of course, it's a different game. China needs the US, it needs Western Europe as markets for its goods. There is a question how far China will go with this. It needs to protect its markets. But clearly, politically, she is upping the game and is looking to project China as the peacemaker. If peacemaker it does not turn out to be, and it does not seem likely that it will, it gives China a talking point that Zelensky was restrained by the US from coming to a peaceful settlement. What that peaceful settlement could be, the Chinese have not set out in any specific detail.
Okay.
They've talked about respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity, but not very much more than that in vague terms.
Yes, frankly, an end to this impasse can only come if the West can impress upon Ukraine to adjust a little bit of what they need to for Russia to stop. Otherwise, there doesn't seem to be any end to this war as it stands. But Sanjay, very quickly before I let you go,
that is not likely to happen.
That is not likely
to happen.
That is not likely to happen. So again, we're continuing with the impasse. At the same time, the Japanese premier is in Ukraine. Could anything but be achieved from that? Because there's a lot of hectic movement in and out of Russia and Ukraine suddenly.
There's not likely to be any outcome from the Japanese visit that will change anything on the ground. A lot of visits have taken place. Every Western European country has gone. Every NATO leader has gone to Ukraine. Now it's the Japanese going. This is an affirmation of solidarity. It's a political signal. It's a willingness to arm and to strengthen Ukraine with economic support. It will be about expressions of that kind. It is not going to materially affect anything. It does not change Japan's position. It does not change Ukraine's calculation, which has always relied on support from Japan, which has been forthcoming. Nothing changes. It's just a way of underlining that earlier affirmation.
Okay, I think those two images then of Xi and Putin together, you've got the Japanese Prime Minister with the Ukrainian authorities, really just define what's really going on as far as this conflict is concerned. Sanjay Suri, thanks a lot for joining us. Let's open this up to the guests who are also joining us. I'm joined by Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow ORF, Fred Weir, Political Analyst Expert based in Russia, also Jean-Pierre Cabestan, Professor at Hong Kong Baptist University. Let me begin with Jean-Pierre first. If we were to read into Xi Jinping's mind, what do you see is going on inside? Jean-Pierre, can you hear me?
Yes, the question was to me.
Yes. What do you think is going
Okay.
on in Xi Jinping's mind as this visit is going on?
I think two things. I think he wants, first of all, to consolidate China's strategic partnership with Russia and really clearly show that Russia is not isolated. It's part of the fact that Putin has been accused by the International Criminal Court of war crimes. Xi Jinping thinks that Russia is a great power which China and the rest of the world need to interact and need to find a compromise with. The other reason is that China wants to play a meaningful role in the negotiation, which may eventually open at the end of the conflict. China wants to sit at the negotiation table one way or another. So in making that trip to Moscow, but also in announcing that he will talk to President Zelensky of Ukraine very soon, I think China wants to show that its role in the eventual negotiation that will take place is legitimate, is important. As you know, China made a 12-point proposal, which is far from being a peace proposal, but at least is a position paper which has upheld a number of principles which show that China is attached to sovereignty, and but at the same time, which is very close to Russia on this issue.
Yes, so there are conflicts of interest here as far as the so-called peace plan is concerned, and it's not very clear. Fred Weir, I'm coming to you. Is there a sight, is there anything in sight as an end to this impasse? All of these are just positioning exercises, or can anyone actually achieve a breakthrough?
Not on the short-term horizon. It clearly, both sides are girding for a few months at least more of hard fighting. Maybe after the spring, in summer, battles are over, we'll have a more decisive outcome. One way or another, one side may be exhausted or be ready to sue for peace. And at that point, what China is doing will become much more relevant. They are positioning themselves. I don't think that this is a weekend proposal that the Chinese are making. I think they realize that this is a long game, but at the end of the process, or when an opening appears, in it hopefully will, that China is a natural mediator in this case.
But who is more likely to run out of steam, as you said, post this current surge of battle? That's the biggest question. Who's going to really blink first?
And I don't know. The fog of war and the clashing narratives are such, but when I'm asked this question, I always say the mathematics favor Russia. All the big advantages are on Russia's side as long as they maintain the political will, keep mobilizing forces. They've only had one mobilization. Ukraine's had 6. Another Russian mobilization seems to be in the wind. If they keep doing that, I think they will grind Ukraine down in time.
Sushant, this is effectively a West versus Russia conflict, as much as the West may deny it. I think that is true. Do you believe the West could tire out of this conflict soon, or are they also steadfast in backing Ukraine to the hilt?
I'm not entirely sure how much the West is going to continue to back this conflict. A few months back, you didn't hear the kind of carping sounds you hear today from many of the Western capitals. The cost of war is in some ways also being borne by the Western capitals at a time when they have their own economic problems. So how much appetite they will have for an endless war, I think there's a bit of a question mark on that. But the question is, can the Chinese actually play honest broker? Do the Chinese have the bona fides or the equities with both sides to actually be able to play an honest broker between the two?
What do you think?
Number one. Number two, if you look at the Chinese peace plan, I don't know how anybody even calls it a peace plan. It's like something you give to a class 12 student and, ask him to write down a few principles on how peace could be brought about. That's not a peace plan. There has to be something much more substantive to that. But this is the typical Chinese hyping of, something which they produce, and then they wave it around the world and pretend that it's a peace plan. So it's not that. And then finally, I think there is also going to be the whole issue of how comfortable will be the West with the Chinese actually trying to play peacemaker. Will the West want the Chinese to take that kind of a role? I'm a little skeptical on that count.
So basically
especially after...
So what you're suggesting is that even if the Chinese could be successful, there's no way the West will let it be successful.
Yeah, because I don't think after what has happened in the Middle East, where the Americans kind of left a vacuum in which the Chinese have tried to step in. Although I don't think the Middle East peace process is going to go very far. It's a 1,500-year-old problem and it's not going to disappear. But having in a sense ceded space out there, would the West be ready for the Chinese to step in as the big daddies who are now making peace between Ukraine, which is backed by the West, and Russia on the other hand? I'm not quite sure how that will play out in Western capitals, how much appetite there is going to be in the Western capitals for that kind of intermediation by the Chinese.
Yeah. So in any ways, this entire so-called, narrative of a peace broker China in Russia is doomed to fail. But Sushant, before I go across to Jean-Pierre one more time, I do want to ask you, how do you think India is looking at these developments?
Well, India,
I think,
as you know...
Jean-Pierre, Jean-Pierre, just one second. Let Sushant come in, then you can respond to the same question if you wish to. Yes, Sushant.
Look, from the Indian point of view, I think India is not happy with, the war. I think India would be very happy if this war was to come to an end. But I don't think there are any exit ramps that India has for either of the two protagonists in this war. I don't think either of the two sides want to disengage from the war just yet. And I think one of the previous speakers had said that they're probably going to jostle for some more space, fight for some more space. And then probably by the time autumn comes, there will be some kind of, they will reevaluate the position at that point of time. Now, as far as India is concerned, the war has caused enormous economic problems. So ideally, India would like to see a peace take place, some kind of ceasefire at the very least. But I don't think anybody is asking India to intercede and play the mediator. And unless that happens, I don't think India should even get involved in
No, I meant how would India be looking at China wanting to play the mediator in this case?
Not with a lot of... I think there would be a lot of discomfiture in India.
Exactly. That's why I'm asking.
After having done what it did in the Middle East, doing the same thing in Eurasia, I think there would be a certain amount of discomfort in India because the more China expands its global footprint, the more uncomfortable India becomes.
Okay. Jean-Pierre, I'm coming to you for a final comment. The entire world agrees that we do need to end this conflict, but are we in store for virtually an endless war? Because neither side would want to give up any territorial claims. And you understand that, possibly from both sides. So, what is it that can bring about any peace at all? Because this conflict is draining everybody, not just the two sides involved, but the rest of the world as well.
Yes, I mean, I think there is a willingness on the European side, at least, to try to speed up the end of the war, if possible. But it depends very much on the Ukrainians. Are the Ukrainians exhausted now? Are they ready to go to the negotiation table at this juncture? I doubt it, because clearly they want to gain more territory before accepting to hold the negotiations, at least to accept the ceasefire. As you may have noticed, Anthony Blinken and the U.S., the Biden administration, are very skeptical about negotiating a ceasefire now, when Russia still occupies 16% of the Ukrainian territory, because a ceasefire and the front line can very quickly turn into a boundary, a border which will stay for ages at the border between Russia and Ukraine. So that's something which the Ukrainians, but it's European and American allies, want to avoid. So that's why they want to gain some
more
territory on the battlefield before moving to a negotiation.
Yes. In the end, though, regardless of whether they're able to regain some territory, it doesn't look very good for Ukraine, precisely for the reasons Fred Weir outlined. And Fred, I have about 20 seconds left. So I want to ask you, internally in Russia, Putin has full support to just grind it out?
As far as we can tell, as you know, it's a very opaque political system. It's a sort of system where things happen at the top quite unexpectedly. But as far as we can tell, as far as all my soundings can discover, Putin's position is pretty solid, and the majority of the population at least acquiesce to the war effort.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Well, this is the reality of the situation as far as this conflict is concerned. No end in sight, turning out to be an endless war. I do thank all of the gentlemen for joining us with their time. On that note, slipping into a very short break. On the other side, we'll get you a report from America, where millions of residents are dealing with heavy rain, floods, gusty winds. This is in California. Stay tuned.
Amritpal Singh, but